Hello and welcome to Jerry's Live. I'm your host Matt Tuman, and tonight we're going to be talking about all things intro to perspective drawing. Perspective drawing is one of my favorite things to do. I did it a lot as a kid and I'm really excited to teach you guys some of the basics to creating your own environments. But before we get into that, I need to mention the teacher's cart, where you'll be able to find all the supplies that I am using tonight so you can do your own perspective drawings, and if you need any of these tools, you'll know where you'll be able to find them. So tonight's class code is JL313. So if you go into the search bar on JerrysArtarama.com and type in that code JL313, it'll bring up the teacher's cart where all of this will be found. So you can get all your supplies there pretty easily. But yeah, we have a lot of fun stuff to get into tonight, so I'm going to jump right into it. If we go to the overhead, I have the Soho Colossal Sketchpad here, which is a very large sketchpad. You can see we've zoomed in on it so you guys can see on my sketches here it's going off of the camera. But I highly recommend when you're starting out with perspective drawing that you start out with a very large pad or a large piece of paper so you can really move around and have a lot of room to do what we need to do, because you will need quite a bit of space. But I'm going to turn this so it is horizontal and open it up and make sure that it is on camera for you guys. Give me 1 second. These sketchpads really are ginormous. Okay. Make sure that is centered for you guys. And I'm going to move it a little bit to the side here, and we should be good. Alrighty. So we're going to start out with 1-point perspective. It's the very first thing that you start out with when you're learning perspective drawing. And for all of you who don't know what perspective drawing is, it's basically how you create forms in space without using a reference from your own head, how you can draw something that looks accurate, looks like it exists in a three-dimensional world. And the basis of it is that everything gets smaller in space as it goes away from you. You know, the further it gets away, the smaller it appears. So first thing we want to do whenever we're doing any kind of perspective drawing is establish our baseline. If any of you have a T-square is also helpful for this. I'm going to do a ruler because it's a lot more accessible for people who don't own a T-square. But essentially, you want to line your ruler up with the bottom of your pad of paper. I move this up here so you guys can see it better. And make sure that it is flush with the bottom of it. And you're going to take, well, first of all, you're just going to draw a line. And this is going to act kind of as like your parallel line that you can draw everything from. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw with, this is a triangle. It has a 90-degree angle on the side here and two 45-degree angles on either side of this. They're super helpful when you're beginning perspective drawing. But I do want you guys to know that outside of the ruler, you don't really need triangles to do perspective drawing. They just make things a lot easier, because when you're starting out, you're going to be doing a lot of vertical lines that you want to be completely perpendicular with whatever your baseline is. And this just makes it so much easier than trying to eye it out every single time. So I got my baseline drawn in, or I have an idea of like where I'm basing everything off of. This is going to be my straight line that I'm building every perpendicular angle off of. And next I want to determine my horizon line. The horizon line is going to be another straight horizontal line on this. I'm going to try to make sure that it's, I don't really need to be doing all this funky stuff here. I'm just going to determine where that is by finding, I'm going to use this, let me back it up a little bit and explain this a little bit better. I'm going to use this vertical line that I've drawn here to get another perpendicular line to make sure that my ruler's straight when I determine where my horizon line is going to be, which I'm just going to throw mine right here. You can throw it anywhere on your piece of paper that you would like. Try to stick to the middle when you're first starting out, to help get yourself an idea of how things are going to work before you start changing things around a lot. So I'm going to label it, oop, my line there got a little bit funky. I'm going to label this as our horizon line. It is helpful to label out all of the lines that you will be drawing when you first start out, because things will get really complicated very quickly if you don't. So I have my horizon line right here, and then we already have a vertical line coming up that I'm going to be using. But the next thing that we have to determine as our vanishing point. So we're doing 1 point perspective. 1 point perspective has 1 vanishing point. That's kind of how they base things off. 2 point perspective, 2 vanishing points. 3 point perspective, 3 vanishing points. You can go all the way up to 6 point perspective, which gets really crazy. But I'm just gonna figure out my first vanishing point. I'm gonna put it directly in the center here, right on that horizon line. Always put your perspective points on your horizon line when you're starting out. Essentially what they are is, if you think of horizon line as like if you're on a giant field or a giant plane and you're looking off in the distance, your horizon line is wherever the land meets the sky. It's that point in the far distance where everything is vanishing towards. Everything's getting smaller towards that point. Yes?
We're having a little bit of difficulty seeing the lines on YouTube. Is
Okay.
there any way to make them a little darker?
I have an H pencil right now. Let me see if I can get a darker pencil, but if we can maybe zoom in. It's a little tricky to zoom in while we're live, but let me see real quick. I'll get a darker pencil and see if you guys can see it a bit better.
I imagine there's a reason you don't want the lines too dark.
Yeah, typically I want them dark so you guys can see them, but typically when you're starting out doing this, you might want to keep them relatively light so that they don't become very obvious in your final drawing and you can erase them easily at the end. But here, let me put my ruler down and try to darken up this line and see if you guys can see it any better.
Yeah.
That's a lot better? Okay. I'm just gonna draw all these lines super thick and very heavy, but you guys should know, draw them light, keep them light to start out with, you know. Light, dark enough that you can see, but light enough where they're not gonna be a huge issue to erase once you have a nice finalized drawing that you don't want a lot of sketch lines running through.
I think even just with the little darker pencil, you can see it better. I don't know if you have to push like super. You can see it a lot better though.
Okay, sweet. So, horizon line here. This is our vanishing point 1. I've labeled it on there. And we're just gonna get right into drawing some boxes, some very simple boxes. So I'm gonna start out by drawing one that is like directly in front of us. So I'm gonna use my triangle here. I'm gonna use my baseline. And I'm just gonna start out by drawing a vertical line of any length, like right here on the paper. And then I'm gonna draw another vertical line that's gonna be parallel to that line, right next to it, however wide I want my box to be. So I'm gonna try to keep them same height. And then all we're gonna do is connect them, like, essentially we're just drawing a square. We're drawing a regular square. That's where everything kind of starts out with, 1 point perspective. And it is almost directly in front of us. You can see it's a little bit off center from the our vanishing point. And then all we're gonna do from there is we're gonna be taking the lines of the top of this box and we're gonna be aiming towards our vanishing point like this and drawing those lines back. And this is gonna look really funky at first, but bear with me. This is gonna look super, super funky. And you're probably wondering right now, like, how do I get a cube from this? This looks insane. It looks like a really tall pointy hat. All we really have to do in this scenario is we have to think about where we want the top of our box to end. Now this is very important because it's kind of up to the viewer's judgment on where you put this. But remember, as things get farther away from us, they get smaller. And if you think about this right here, our horizon line, we're gonna consider it at eye level. So wherever your eyes line up with the horizon is where our eye level is gonna be equal to the horizon line. So I'll write eye level over here. Horizon line and eye level are the same thing. So if I'm looking at this box is below the horizon line, it's below eye level, which means we're looking down on it. So we're gonna be able to see the top of that box, but it's not gonna be like, if I draw another box right next to it, and I'm gonna draw these very quickly so we can get to more fun stuff. But I'm gonna take the same vanishing points. I have a square, and I think I forgot to explain to you exactly what you're drawing when you're doing like 1 point perspective. But 1 point perspective is essentially when you're looking down a long hallway and everything is going towards 1 point at the very end of that hallway. Like you have just one long hallway that you're standing in the middle of. This is a person standing in the middle of a hallway, and that hallway is vanishing away from them like this. So everything's vanishing towards 1 point at the very end of this hallway. That is essentially what 1 point perspective is. Now, when I get into describing like 2-point perspective and 3-point perspective, you'll figure out that those things all kind of work in tandem. You can use all 3 of them within one drawing, or mainly people balance between 1-point perspective and 2-point perspective within the same drawing, depending on how things are facing. But let me see, I have the top plane here that I've made equal to this line here, but see, if I had made the top plane to this box all the way out here, it still looks relatively normal if we just ignore that line there. It still looks relatively normal, but if I start to pull it out farther and farther, all of a sudden I'm not just having like a perfectly even box, I'm getting more of a rectangle shape that's getting kind of wonky the closer it gets to this vanishing point. It's starting to look like a super long rectangle going back in space. So where you put the back of this kind of determines what kind of shape you're going towards. If you're going more towards a cube, just keep that in mind. It's kind of a push and pull and a play when you're working with this. But you can see I'm drawing a box over here that's slightly more towards our right. I do get mixed up between left and right, so excuse me if I say the wrong way, but over this direction, my right, yes, I do write with my right hand, that makes sense. And I have gotten these 2 points on the tip of my box vanishing towards this 1 point, and I'm going to get the bottom ones too, because since this is being pushed towards the right, we can see a lot more of the side of this box now. So I'm going to do the same thing I did to the top. I'm going to take that bottom vanishing point, and I'm going to draw a line all the way back. When you get really good at perspective and understanding perspective, you don't need to draw the line all the way to the point. I could even line this up and just draw that little bit, but just so you guys can see a bit clearer what's happening, I'm going to draw it all the way to that point. And then all I have to do from there is make sure that this back plane is again parallel to these other vertical lines. So all of our horizontal lines are parallel to each other going that way. All of our vertical lines are parallel to each other going this way. And then these lines are the ones that are really important when it comes to first point perspective. First point perspective? Yes. 1-point perspective. That is what I meant to say. It's not called first point perspective. So I'm going to make sure that this line back here is again vertical with my other lines. And you can kind of take it from there. You can just keep drawing cubes that all go towards this 1 point. And I'm actually going to draw some over here above our horizon line so you guys can see what that looks like. In fact, actually, first I'm going to draw one that's exactly on the horizon line, which is probably one of the most boring ones. Like if I put a box directly in front of our first vanishing point on the horizon line, it would be just a cube, because you wouldn't be able to see any of the sides that are vanishing towards that vanishing point. They would all be hidden by the front plane of the box. But if I take a cube over here and I put it again almost directly on our horizon line, in an ideal world I would have this lined up with this plane, so I make sure that they're exactly perpendicular, but we're working fast and I'm kind of eyeing it a little bit. And then I'm going to draw the rest of my cube going this way, and then again we're going to be able to see a bit more of the right hand plane on this box than we will the left hand, since it's pushed to our left hand side. So I'm going to again line up this point towards our vanishing point and then draw it down like this. And again, determine how I want this cube to be. Do I want it to be a rectangle? Do I want it to be a cube? Remember, everything is getting smaller as it gets farther away from you, so this plane, if I want it to be a cube, is going to be thinner than the plane that's facing us. So if I made that plane the same exact width of the let me back that up again. If I made this plane the same exact width as the plane that is facing us, it would look more like a rectangular box than it would like a true cube, because those planes are getting smaller as they go back in perspective. If you need me to explain that again, please ask in the comments. And this is 1-point perspective too, so this is kind of the most simple version of perspective, so things are going to ramp up in complexity as we go. So please, if you need me to re-explain anything, just ask. We're starting off nice and easy here though, just drawing some simple boxes, and I'm even going to go ahead and I'm going to draw one box above our horizon line so you guys can see what that would look like. And maybe I'll even draw it all the way out here so you guys can see, once it's further away from the vanishing point, how it starts to kind of turn and change. So I'm going to draw my line all the way up here for the edge of my box. I'm going to draw the front plane of my square, and then from there everything again is going down towards this vanishing point. And I'm using my triangle to do this. I like having the clear triangle to be able to see all my lines while I'm working, but you can also use a ruler just as easily for this. Yes, question?
What about spheres or more rounded objects?
So that gets very complicated very quickly. Drawing ellipses in perspective takes a lot of practice. I can show you really quickly how to do it because it is kind of interesting, but it's going to take a little bit of an explanation. But let me get through our cubes first real fast before we get into more complicated shapes. I will get to that though. Okay, but we have our cube up here that's above our horizon line, so we're going to be able to see more of this bottom plane. And this is kind of where it gets complicated, when you can just see tiny little slivers of planes rather than like larger portions of them. Like right here, we can see a good chunk of the top of this, but here it's a tiny little sliver, and that's where things can get kind of funky. But before I figure out that, I'm going to figure out where the side of this is going to line up if I want a nice cube. So I think mine will probably go right there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that point, I'm going to line it up with my vanishing point. You can see, okay, we have that line. And then you kind of have to remember this back wall has to be, again, parallel with these top lines here. So all you have to do is make sure that it's lined up parallel, and even if it's the tiny sliver, just connect it to this line right there, draw it across, and you should have the bottom of that cube. And I can even darken it up a bit. So you can start to see, we just get a tiny little sliver of the bottom of this cube, and we would see more of the bottom of it the higher it got up. One more thing to include really quick, this is kind of a little bit of jargon that you might hear if you're working in perspective. Lots of times when people have these kind of layouts, they'll do something where they'll write, down here they'll write bird's eye view, and then on the top plane above the horizon line, they're like worm's eye view. And that's a little confusing when you first look at it, because it's like, why is the top plane above the horizon line your worm's eye view? But just think of it like, if you ever hear people talking about that, it's like if you're a tiny little worm on the ground, you're looking up at the sky, you're gonna see things like the bottom of boxes, you're gonna see things from a lower perspective, which is why the top plane is called the worm's eye view, and then the bottom plane is called the bird's eye view, because when you're a bird, you're looking down on everything, you're gonna be seeing the tops of all these boxes and everything like that. So if you ever hear that kind of jargon, that's where it's coming from. But one of you guys wanted to know how to draw circles and spheres in perspective, and that's where things start to get a lot trickier when it comes to drawing. But I'm going to show you guys really quickly before I get into 2-point perspective how you can do that. So basically, first thing we got to ask yourselves is how we can draw a circle. So whenever you can, let me see if I can get a little bit more of the top of this. I'm going to start up here. This isn't going to be in perspective. I'm just going to show you how you can draw a circle without using tools or anything, without just like, I mean, obviously you can just draw it out if you're really good at drawing perfect circles and can just go crazy good on that. But first thing we got to do is, again, just draw a square. Always start with a square. And then we're going to break that square up into different pieces. So I'm going to divide it top to bottom, and then divide it again in half this way. And then one more time, I'm going to divide it from corner to corner like that. So we have our strong center point there, and then I'm going to use this as a grid to draw a circle, or if you want to draw a circle in perspective, it's known as an ellipse. It's still a circle, but people call it an ellipse when it's a circle in perspective. But right now it's just going to be a typical circle, so I'm going to draw this out here really quickly for you guys. So, how we can get a circle from a square. That's step one of drawing ellipses, or AKA circles in perspective. The next thing we have to do is put it on our little 1-point perspective grid down here, essentially. So, I can draw just the base plane of one of these boxes. So I'm going to do the front of my box going this way, and then my lines going towards my vanishing point from the edges of that, and then again find the base plane of that. There's my square in perspective just laying on the ground. And we're going to do the exact same thing we did up here for this box on the ground. We're going to divide it in half. Again, if you have trouble finding this line, just divide this first line in half and then connect it with your vanishing point, and you'll get it exactly split down the middle. And then same is true of this one in the center. Make sure it's just parallel with these other lines that are coming through. So you get a cross going through your square. And then once again, you're going to connect the corners of your box. And now you have your grid to draw your ellipse. Tips for drawing ellipses, you just kind of want to throw it out, which sounds really funny, but if you start, like, kind of what I did up here, if you start drawing, like, really slowly and carefully, you're probably going to end up with really uneven lines. If I do that darker, you're probably going to end up with really kind of uneven lines. You're going to get a shakier hand. You want to, like, trust the motion of your arm when you're doing this, when you're throwing out an ellipse. And let me see, I gotta roll up my sleeves for a second. It's kind of all about good drawing posture when you get into this kind of thing. So you're going to start on one corner of this and you're just kind of throw them out. I like to go over mine a few times if I don't think it turned out very right, but that's an ellipse. It's a circle in perspective. And whenever you're thinking, on that same note, whenever you're drawing in perspective, I suggested you use a big sheet of paper, mainly because you can see now we're already covering up so much of this very, very quickly and you need a lot of room to work, but also it has to do with drawing posture. And it's something that I think a lot of artists kind of get hung up on when they're drawing, is how they're like angled in their chair. Like, we like to sit in all kinds of funny ways when we're focused on something. We're not paying attention to how we're sitting or standing, however we're doing it. And it gets really important when you're drawing in perspective or drawing any kind of like consistent ellipses, consistent circles, or like straight lines, to be able to do it with good posture. So I highly recommend you think about your posture a lot when you're doing perspective. Just kind of remember, you know, stand up straight. You don't need a super stiff back or anything. It's okay if you're leaning a little bit, but you want to make sure that when you're drawing, you're not doing it from your wrist like this. Like, if you're just doing a little arc from point to point, that's where your wrist is helpful, because your wrist naturally wants to curve like that. It doesn't want to draw a straight line. It naturally wants to go into a curve. So if you want to draw ellipses or circles, it's a little bit helpful to maybe draw it from the wrist, but I highly recommend you try and draw from your shoulder. Not your elbow, your shoulder. Because again, when you're trying to draw from your elbow, you get arcs. When you're doing things, you're not going to get straight, consistent lines. Your arm might try to work against you, but when you're drawing from your elbow, that's when you can start pushing lines out a little more consistently, and that's when posture becomes really helpful. So if you're trying to do this without a ruler or a triangle or anything, and you're trying to draw straight lines really quickly, do it quickly, mark out your points, and then just remember to push it from your shoulder rather than trying to draw from your wrist or your elbow. It'll also help you stay away from carpal tunnel and tendonitis and things like that, which I've had to deal with, and it's awful. So good posture is very important for longevity. Yes.
Okay, so this is a little bit of a two-part question.
Yeah.
The initial question was, do you have to move that middle line back towards the back of the box? And when I asked for further clarification, since that middle line in the box that you just drew goes backwards towards the horizon line,
yes,
would that middle line that goes east to west need to be pushed more towards the horizon line to force a leaning perspective?
Yes, it would actually. You're exactly right. That is something that I missed explaining. Good on you for catching it. Like I said earlier, what they're getting at is that everything, like I said, is getting smaller. The closer it gets to the horizon line, everything's getting smaller. You know, like you look down a street with a bunch of like electric poles going down it, they're all going to get tinier the further they get away from you when you're trying to draw them in a two-dimensional plane. And what they're getting at here is that this line that I drew east for west, I didn't stick it in the exact center of this per se, but pushed it a little bit more towards the back of this, because this plane right here is going to be just minusculely, oh, I got to push it up. This plane right here is going to be just minusculely smaller than this plane right there, because this one is closer to the horizon line. When it's this close to us, it's not going to be very noticeable, which is part of the reason I didn't even think about it, but thank you for catching it. But as it gets even closer to this point, it's going to start becoming more noticeable. Like, for instance, if I try and draw a box that's really like almost on line with the horizon line, a square, like if my foreplane of the square is right there, and then this is all going towards the horizon line, like that, this is going to get really wonky, because we'll be barely able to see the top plane of this, and then I draw the back of this box like that, You can see how little of this we see, but if I try to split this in half, we're gonna be able to see a lot more of this, of the first half of it, than we will of the back. And I didn't even draw that perfectly perpendicular, which is why the triangles are super helpful. But you can see, we can barely see the back half of this triangle because as things are getting, again, closer to the horizon line, the smaller they're gonna get. So you're exactly right about that. Okay, we did have a question about drawing spheres in perspective, but I kind of want to get to drawing 2-point perspective. We were thinking about getting into a second episode of this. If you guys are really into drawing perspective, there's so many different things that I can talk about. But I'm gonna get right into drawing 2-point perspective, and I'm going to get a new sheet of paper for that since we're covering that up real fast. And you can see my fingers are kind of covered in graphite, so I'm leaving fingerprints. But if you guys have any really interesting questions about perspective, or if you want to learn more about it, I'm definitely happy to do another episode on it sometime early next year once we get our schedule cleared up. So let me know in the comments, or if you have any, if you're into perspective and you have any specific types of perspective you want to learn, like 5-point or 6-point perspective. When you get into 6-point perspective, that is how you draw the reflections on a sphere just from your imagination. It gets really crazy and really complicated very quickly. So if you want to learn how to do that, I'm more than happy to teach, because perspective is kind of like the way we can nerd out about things as artists. So again, this is going to be my horizon line. We're doing 2-point perspective now. So 2-point perspective, similar to 1-point perspective, not that much more complicated than it. But it's like if you have a box in front of you and it's like tilted on a corner, so you looking right at the corner rather than the front plane, both sides of that box are going to be vanishing towards a different point. I'm going to illustrate that out so you can see a little bit better, but we're going to do very similarly to when we did 1-point perspective, and we're going to find 2 different vanishing points. So I'm just going to put them on the very edges of my line. You can actually kind of put them anywhere you like. If you put them really close together, you're not going to be able to get much of a drawing out of it, so I recommend you try to put them far apart. And actually, when we're drawing on a sheet of paper like this, and we're doing 2-point perspective or anything more than 1-point perspective, in real life, these vanishing points would not be on the page. So if you're like, have a reference image that you're trying to copy exactly, and you decide to lay it out on a grid like this, your horizon points, or sorry, vanishing points are probably going to be really, really far out where you can't even see them on your sheet of paper unless you have a ginormous sheet of paper. For the sake of this presentation, we have them on the lines here, but keep that in mind, is that typically these vanishing points are going to be super far away because our plane and line of vision can go really far. We're trying to keep it simple though, so we can see exactly where these are going to be vanishing. So I'm going to do vanishing point 1 and vanishing point 2. And like I said earlier, I'm going to make sure I get a nice perpendicular line going here. I'm going to follow that down so we can have it come towards the bottom as well. Oh, that didn't quite line up. That's okay. You guys know what I meant to do there. So we're going to get the corner of a box going. So straight line, again, all of the lines that are going vertical in this case are going to be parallel, but the horizontal lines are going to kind of go away. So if I just have a little vertical section that's going to be the corner of my box, I'm going to take the top and bottom point of that line and I'm going to put them going towards vanishing point 1 and vanishing point 2. This is going to be us drawing out the sides of our box. So I'm going to show you really quick. From the top of this to vanishing point 1 on my right side, and then from the top and bottom of this to vanishing point 2 on my left side is going to get us the left and right hand side of this box. So corner of our box facing towards us, the sides of our boxes are getting smaller the further they go away from us, and then I'm going to start drawing in again these lines that need to be parallel with this line right here. I almost said perpendicular. So I'm going to make sure I get those going. And I'm going to see, this is almost exactly in front of us. So we're going to see basically equal halves to each side of this box. So I'm going to try to make sure that they are equal. And then once we get the sides of our box going, that's when things get a little trickier because we need to figure out what the top plane of this is going to look like. So remember, this side of the box, we're not going to be drawing it towards this vanishing point. The left-hand side of the top of this box is going to be going towards vanishing point 1, and the right-hand side of the top of the box is going to be going towards vanishing point 2. So you can see here really quickly, all I have to do is connect the dots of this. This is where the ruler comes in handy because I've been using the triangle this whole time, but the ruler is nice and long and will get you all the way to your vanishing points if you need to go there. But you can see now we have a box and we have the top plane of that box working, and this box is in a bird's eye perspective, so it is below the horizon line or below our eye level. And basically we continue the same way. I can have a box over here, again, underneath the horizon line. I'm going to start drawing these out really quickly so you guys can see a lot of examples of how they will look. Again, drawing in my parallel lines that are going vertical. All of our vertical lines in this case are going to be going straight up and down parallel to each other. So those are not going to be warping in perspective at all, so you don't need to worry about them. It's all the lines that are going to each side of the box now are going to be in perspective. And I'm going to figure out where I want the top plane of this box to be. Maybe I want it to be a little bit taller than this one over here. So I'm going to take it from that point over. And then again from that top plane over to this side. And then I have to get my parallel lines going down for each side of this box and the top plane again. I'm kind of using this triangle so you guys can see the way I'm mapping this out, but I'm actually going to stop using it right now so I can show you really quickly. Eventually you'll want to kind of stop working with the tools as much. I know a lot of, if you're an architect out there, you probably want to keep working with them, but for people who want to get into illustration and things like that, you kind of don't want to be continually bogged down by having to move this triangle or your ruler or your T-square all over the page as you're working on this. And it's good too to be able to work up confidence in your drawing. So just trust yourself to be able to try and get that line straight to the bottom over there, and then again straight that way, or even just eye it out and see if you can match up where that line is going to go like this without having to draw out the full line. But it's going to get you a lot more confident the better you get at perspective and the better you understand it to be able to do those lines quickly and accurately. So again, I have my box up here above the horizon line in a worm's eye perspective where we're looking up at it. But I want to show you guys really quickly how you can get something kind of emphasizing the fact that things as they get closer to this vanishing point are going to get smaller. So if I draw a box that's really far off in the distance right now and it's all the way on our right hand side, it's going to be really tiny. And if I draw it the exact same size as this box here, you can see really quickly how small this thing gets, because I'm going to use these same lines that I used for this box to try and get, and remember, all of this same size, it's not going to be the exact same size as this since it's so far away and since things are getting smaller. So I'm going to make sure that it looks like it's about the same proportion, but it's going to be obviously tiny compared to this box over here. And then I'm going to use those same exact lines to determine the rest of my box. And I can even draw the other side of this box right here. So I've only drawn the side that we're seeing right now, but you can just as easily draw the sides of this box that are invisible to us as if the box was transparent. And we do it the same exact way that we did that top plane, where I'm going to take this point on my right hand side vanishing towards the left and this point on my left hand side vanishing towards the right. So I can kind of get that base plane of the box, and then I can use that line that I just created as the vanishing point and draw it in there. And then I know these two are going to connect, so I can draw them just like that, but if I wanted to, I could follow them both to the vanishing point over here, and you can get the base plane that way. But here we have this box farther away from us. If we had pushed it all the way back, and we could even do a whole line of them slowly getting smaller the further they get towards these vanishing points. So that, in a nutshell, is 2-point perspective. Do we have any questions right now? Because I know I'm going through a lot with 1-point and 2-point. I'm going to discuss in a little bit how you can combine the two and start to add and take away other shapes. Yes?
How do you know which one to use?
That is kind of where things get a little more complicated and where a lot of people get hung up on when they're first starting out with perspective. And honestly, it's just kind of looking at, like, what makes sense. And sometimes you have to, like, slow down and think about it really hard. And I know I did when I first learned how to draw perspective. But if I had drawn a box over here and, you know, I drew the left-hand side of this box going this way, and I drew the right-hand side of this box going to the right, and the left-hand side of this box going to the left, you can kind of see how I would get those two sides and then again, these straight lines. It's when we get to the top and bottom planes that I think a lot of people get bogged down with, like, which vanishing point do I use? And it's really like intuition when you think about it. So if I have this point right here and I want to draw this side of the box, it doesn't make sense to use this line because that is going to give us the same plane over here. So we are forced to use our first vanishing point in order to get that side of the box. And the same over here. It doesn't make sense to try and use this one because all we're going to get is this funky line going this way. It's not going to close the box up. So really it just takes a little bit of like time and patience in thinking about it and getting your brain to kind of absorb the information. Because once your brain has absorbed it, all of this will come very naturally and very quickly. And you'll be able to draw these out without having to draw your perspective points, without having to draw out your horizon line. You'll be able to draw all different kinds of boxes and things floating in space. Yes?
Rena in YouTube would like to know, what if you have a large building and you're so close to it that you only have a partial view? How do you determine perspective in that case?
You're so close to it that you... Is this like you're looking at a reference image?
I think it's if you're in real life and you're looking at, like,
Okay. That is
high-rise.
kind of getting... Well, that can get into three-point perspective if you're looking at a high-rise. That can get really fun. But I'm not... That's too much information right now. But it's really the same concept, just blown up. You know, I highly recommend that you just start out drawing these small little boxes, and if you want to draw out this high rise that's like super close to you and you're having a hard time thinking about it, try and figure out, let me think about this. So it's like, think about like this as my piece of paper. This box is my piece of paper right now, and I'll have to move it so the picture-in-picture isn't blocking it, right? And I have a building that it's like, maybe I only see the very corner of this building, and it's like, it just keeps going up. So the corner of the building's right here. This is where you don't really need to map out the perspective that much. Unless you're getting into tiny little details like you see windows and things like that. You might even be able to work this almost as a one-point perspective drawing. So let's say I see this tiny corner of this side of the building, and then the other side of the building, maybe it's like vanishing towards that direction. So I can see the base plane of it, and then maybe I can even see the other side of this building over here. So I can just see this is our building, and I can only see this chunk of it. You don't really need to worry about perspective too much because this is like not a super complicated perspective. What I think you should think about is like if you can see the corner edge base plane of this building, try and figure out where your vanishing point is. So like I said, horizon line tends to be at eye level. Where is your eye level when you're looking at this building? If you look beside this building and if you can see like the actual horizon line, think about where that is. And think about where your vanishing points might be. You can kind of figure out where vanishing points might be in a reference image by looking at like the edges of things and where your horizon line is. And going back to what I said earlier, in real life, your vanishing points are going to be very, very far away from each other. Almost so far away that if you just start drawing things out, you're going to be okay. So I have like my horizon lines here. Maybe this is vanishing this way. Maybe equal lines. And then the baseline of these windows that I'm going to draw in, again, is almost going to be shipped to each other. So I can even draw the top of this window here, and maybe it has a little bottom ledge, and I don't know, this is a whole window pane, I don't know. This is a really ugly building, but you kind of get the idea. In real life, vanishing points are so far away that your lines almost start to look parallel, even though they are vanishing towards a point. That's kind of my point with getting into that. Okay. Was there another question that I forgot while I was getting into that whole rambling? No? Okay. Let me see here. See how much I covered this paper with graphite on the side of this. I wanted to say too, I had done a drawing here that I wanted to show you guys if we'd gotten to it. I had started out this drawing where I was drawing a neighborhood kind of in perspective, and then you can barely see it. I'm going to hold it up here. I wanted to maybe show you guys if we had time how to draw things within a sphere, which is getting into like 4-point and 5-point perspective. Right now, I'm not sure if we'll have time to do that. So again, if you want to learn more about perspective, let me know in the comments and we can figure out if we can do another show early next year.
Everybody does.
Okay, cool. Sometimes I'm not sure because I find perspective super interesting, but I also understand that it can be very boring.
Everybody does, and they have lots of suggestions for what they'd like to see.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Is there any, I actually want to know, do any of you guys have any like shapes or things that you want to see me draw in perspective. Like, do you want to see me draw a cone in perspective or like a little house or something? Let me know in the comments. Please don't make it too complicated because we are like quick on time and I can only do so much.
But we did get a request for a boat.
A boat.
And a coffee
oh my
cup.
gosh. A boat. I can do a coffee cup. The coffee cup I can do. I was drawing a boat from a reference photo literally yesterday that I was talking to Emmy about, and boats are such weird shapes. They're such weird shapes. They're all curvy and everything. I will try and draw a very simplified boat for you. But, oh, my point was there. I'm drawing this really heavy and thick with the Cezanne's graphite pencils. Any kind of graphite pencils will work fine for you. But if you want to do a sketch like this and then you don't want all your sketch lines to kind of get bogged down when you're doing complicated perspective drawings, non-photo blue pencils are super helpful. You can edit them out digitally, and they're also really easy to erase and everything like that. And keep your sketch lines separate from your final drawing. So if you're doing a million different perspective lines like this, and you want to draw just a box on top, you can use blue for all of your perspective lines, and then use like a graphite pencil or an ink pencil or whatever for your box on top, so it's not getting as confusing. It's really helpful to draw with multiple colors when you're doing perspective drawings. So I highly recommend these if you would like to use them. But yeah, let's draw a coffee cup. And let me figure out where I just put my pencil. There it is. It's rolling off the edge there. And I might actually grab a different one because I wore that so thin. I'm being a little heavy-handed right now so you guys can see, but let me see if I have another. You guys can see we use these quite often, so we've gone through a bit of them. I have a 10B right there. Let me use, all of my Bs are really worn down because...
Want a sharpener?
No, I think it'll be alright. I don't want to spend too much time sharpening. It won't make that much of a difference for your guys' understanding. It'll just make my drawing look a little uglier. Okay, so I'm going to flip to an entirely new page for this so you guys aren't confused with the grid that I have laid out there. We're going to draw a coffee cup in perspective, and then if we have time, we're going to try to draw the boat. It's going to be a really simple boat. I'm sorry. This is the best I can do in these tough conditions. Okay, so coffee cup in perspective. We're going to draw her horizon line. I'm not going to worry too much about it being perfectly parallel with the edges of my paper. And I think I just drew straight on the ruler there. So, okay. Horizon line, there we are. We're going to do this in 2-point perspectives, and we're going to think about how I drew the ellipse in perspective earlier, because that's going to come in handy here. But first off, I'm going to do the same thing I did earlier, and I'm just going to start out by drawing a box. So I'm going to try to draw a straight parallel line that's perpendicular to my horizon line, and then I'm going to do lines towards my vanishing point going this way, and again going that way. And then I'm going to draw more parallel lines for my box. And I'm going to make this box tall and skinny. I don't know why I was using... Do you see what I just did there? You guys didn't see what I just did there because it was off camera. I did something a little silly because I thought my ruler was like parallel with the bottom, but it looked like this, which is why that line went so wonky there. And it's not at all parallel with that. So I'm going to erase that line because I was working off instinct and not actually seeing what I was doing. But now I'm going to try and get this actually parallel with my other lines. And I'm going to make this a little bit wider this way, because that's how I think coffee cups are. And I'm going to draw this almost on the horizon line, so we're not going to see very much of the top plane of this. This line is going down towards our vanishing point there, and that one's coming down this way. And this is going to be very much a rough and dirty coffee mug, so feel free to do a much cleaner and nicer version that I'm going to show you right now. You can see here, the closer this top plane is to our horizon line, the flatter it's going to look. Same way with the bottom plane. If our bottom plane was all the way up here, it was going to look much flatter. But if I pulled it all the way down, it's going to be a much sharper triangle to get to those vanishing points. That's something to think about when you're drawing things from real life. And I got these 2 planes here that we'll be able to see, but I'm going to also make sure that I draw the planes behind it. Kind of like, again, an invisible box that we're going to be drawing our ellipses into. I'm going to make sure I get those points from my corner. And now I have this back edge here, so I can draw the back edge of this box going again parallel with my other lines. I'm sure I'm going to watch this back and I'm going to see myself switch between parallel and perpendicular a million times. So if I have confused you at all between my rambling, let me know and I will explain more thoroughly tomorrow, because I will go back and answer any questions that weren't answered or clarify anything that needs to be clarified in the comments tomorrow. So don't worry if you're confused right now and you don't understand what's going on. I will be happy to explain it to you in the comments. Okay, but we have our plane going here, and I'm even going to draw the tiny little sliver that we see of the underside of this top plane that's coming down. And it's going to be just the tiniest little bit of it, but it's still important. Okay, this is the beginnings of our coffee mug, a box. That's all we need to start out with. And we're going to do the same thing that we did earlier when we're drawing ellipses in perspective. A round coffee mug, we need a circle on top and a circle on the bottom. So I'm going to go and I'm going to draw my box coming through here. And again, my straight line coming through this box. I'm going to try to cut it in half. So it's going to be, this little bit is going to be slightly smaller than this bit up front, because again, this part is closer to the vanishing point. So I'm going to draw this halfway point a little bit closer that way, but it's minuscule, it's really tiny, since this is relatively close to us. And then I'm going to draw it vanishing towards this point and get the other side of this. And now I'm going to try to draw, actually I still need this line over here. Again, going to try to cut this plane in half. The other direction, horizontally. And I should have my center point forming right there. And then I would do the same with the top plane, and I'm going to try to show you how it's going to get very small. In fact, we're going to barely be able to see any of the top ellipse of this coffee cup. We're going to be looking at it from a worm's eye perspective almost, where it's like almost a giant coffee cup towering over us. So if you're like bent really low on your table and looking at it almost at eye level, this is what your coffee cup would look like. But I'm going to try and get where I think the center of this line would be, and at least draw that going through, because I could just barely be able to see this ellipse. And then again, think about your posture when you're throwing ellipses out. I'll roll up my sleeves again, and just be very cautious of where you're throwing your ellipses from. If you need to turn your paper while you're doing this, I highly recommend. I've been trying to keep it straight so you guys can see what I'm drawing a little bit better, but like if you need to turn your paper so you can get that line easier, please do so. And actually I might do that so I can draw this ellipse a bit easier. And I'm going to start just from this corner and try to hit all of my points coming through. And again, this is going to be a rough and dirty coffee mug. We're getting the bottom plane of this going. Yes.
On the bottom plane, how do you decide how far to push that center line back?
It's all about kind of your intuition as an artist is how I don't want to get too mathematical when we're going into this. You really can. You can get mathematical. You can look at this line and you can divide it in half and do some kind of like percentage of how far you want to push it back in terms of like the perspective. But we're not going to get into that because we're trying to learn how you can draw things quickly and easily without getting too bogged down in the geometry, which you really can with perspective. So it's really about intuition. So when you're looking at it and you're thinking, like if I just draw the line separate from this, and I'm thinking I want this line to be cut in half, I'm probably going to do it right there. That's exactly half of this. And all I have to do when it's in perspective is I got to think the plane closer to the vanishing point is going to be smaller. So I'm just going to push that dot a little farther back, just a little bit, because this is relatively close to us. It's not going to be a huge difference when the object is super close to us. And when it's far away, it's going to be kind of hard to see. So it's okay if you smudge it a little bit. It's okay if it's slightly off. I think it's good to remember that these are worlds that you're creating, and when we already have our vanishing points super close together, we're already kind of doing a forced perspective. And by forced perspective, I mean anything that doesn't look like straight realism. So, because if we were drawing straight realism, these vanishing points would be all the way off, away, super far away from what the object we're actually drawing, because, you know, when we're looking on the horizon, these vanishing points can go on into infinity, essentially. They're vanishing into infinity. So all you got to think about is how you want this box to look, how you want this box to feel. All I do is I push that slightly back from where I would split the line in the center to think of where the center of the box would fall. If that is a little confusing to you, another way that you can find it is that you can take the corners of these boxes and do what I did earlier, just connect them in a cross, and that way you find the center point of your box. You can use that and draw to your vanishing point like this, to try and find this other edge, and from that point you can then find the other side of this and cut your box in half that way. If just eyeing it is not working it for you, you can do that. Just find the center point, and if you have the center point, you can find everything else. So, back to our coffee mug. We've got this bottom ellipse going. We can barely see the top ellipse. We would do essentially the same thing for the bottom ellipse, for the top ellipse as we did for the bottom if we could see more of it. But for right now, I'm just kind of gonna suggest what I think it's gonna look like, and it's gonna be really thin. It might, like, the edge of it might be like right there and there. And it's just gonna be kind of like that. You can barely see any of it, and that's okay. The next thing that we're gonna do is we're gonna find kind of the lines that go up and connect each side, the sides of this, because we don't really want to use these lines. These aren't the size of a traditional coffee mug. We want to make sure that we're connecting, kind of going from our ellipse. Lots of people, when they're doing this, this is where, honestly, things get confusing to me right here too, when you're connecting two ellipses together, because lots of people will just take it right from that corner and draw it up. And that's where things can start to look a little wonky if I even draw my other side here. And I will say, this is the weird thing I did is that I didn't make this an exact cube. I made this more of a rectangle, so we're gonna have a rectangular coffee cup. If you should draw this as kind of an exact cube, if you want a coffee cup that's perfectly circular. I'm not sure why I did that in the moment. I was driving forward, so keep that in mind. Emmy's laughing at me right now. Hey, we're trying our best over here. And honestly, you know, if there was a coffee cup this shape, I would vibe with it. I think you could sip out of it pretty good, honestly. But when you're thinking about drawing those lines connecting your two ellipses together, it's not like you can just draw it straight up from corner to corner there, but you kind of want to think of it as like getting the curve of the ellipse a bit into it, because it's not going to be a sharp edge per se. You're not going to have an exact like 90-degree angle on your coffee mug pointing out like that, which is what it can kind of look like if you just draw the line straight up. You want to make sure that you're getting a bit of that edge in, so you're suggesting at like the rounded corners of this object. And so things look a little bit more realistic and less robotic, unless you're going for a robotic coffee cup feel. That's fine too. The next thing we want to think about is our handle and how we're going to draw that in. And essentially what we're going to do is we're going to add another cube onto the side of this. And I'm going to do it super quickly, since we're already, this kind of stuff, like, I'm always like, oh, I'm gonna blow through this, you know, it's gonna be so quick to figure this out and explain it, but it always takes so much more time to explain than I think we anticipate when we're talking about art supplies and drawing and how to do fine art and all of that. But all I did right here is I drew another cube in the center, well, another rectangle in the center of this plane, and then I'm going to build a shape out from that. So I'm going to build a cube coming out from that. So I'm going to use this point right here, and maybe the non-photo blue are super light, so I'm not sure if this will show up well, but I thought maybe, no, I'm not going to do that. I was going to use a second color so you guys could see a bit better what that looks like, but I'm not sure if that's going to show up totally well. So I'm going to continue on with this one right here. But the same thing, I'm going to use this vanishing point, this point here and our vanishing point to draw a line extruding from this object, and then I'm going to do the same exact thing on this line to get that coming out. And then same thing for the top plane too. And we're going to see just barely any of the top of this handle for our coffee mug. And then again, I'm going to draw parallel lines coming up. This is kind of tricky to see. So I'm happy too, if you guys would like, if you guys want more clear diagrams of this, I can draw out a more well-drawn or just clearer diagram of what's going on, and I'm happy to post it into our Jerry's Live Facebook group after the show has ended. A little plug for our Facebook group: if you would like to join our Jerry's Live Facebook group and post any art that you might be creating or show us anything that you might have made using information that you learned from our show, please do so. Just answer the security question on Facebook and we'll let you in. If you don't answer the security question, we won't let you in. But you can see right now, I've got a box that's kind of coming out of the side of this box that I created the same way that I created this box, just thinking about how I can connect the two together essentially. And I'm going to use it to figure out how I want to draw my handle. And my handle's going to be coming off of this kind of funky because we have like our very thin cylindrical coffee mug looking shape that's coming right here. This is kind of like the shape of the coffee mug that I'm drawing. It's very thin for some reason. I think it could work as a coffee mug though. So I'm gonna try to draw my handle kind of coming off the corner edge of our really thin coffee mug. And I'm gonna start by thinking about the connecting points, which normally like were round handled, so I'm just gonna draw 2 round little circles right on the edge of this. And then I'm gonna just try to construct the shape within our box. And this is where things can get a little loosey-goosey when you're thinking about it, because the top, the bottom, like this is where the ellipse drawing really comes in handy, because essentially what I'm gonna be doing is I'm gonna be drawing half of an ellipse in the center of this box. So if I can find the center line of this box going that way, and I can barely even see the top plane going this way, I can kind of build the curvature of it. And I'm going to use the motion of my wrist, which can do little curves very well, to get that curve nice and smooth. And I'll probably even do a bit more of a curve than that, because we want it to be coming towards these points that I drew out here. And then I'm going to try to draw the inside curve in a similar way, kind of mimicking that. And this is going to be a super long handle too, so we're drawing this handle like this. I'm giving you a diagram of this funky coffee mug that I decided to draw for you guys. But this is kind of the tricky thing with perspective, is that even though we're planning everything out right in front of us, things can kind of still go a way we didn't expect. It's just a matter of practicing and figuring out how you can manipulate this environment the best way to suit your needs and whatever you need to draw. And again, this is a lot of really dark lines happening right here. So if you guys can even see what I'm trying to do, I just need to connect these lines with the edge of my dots there to try and get that handle kind of coming out. There's our really wonky coffee mug. I will be drawing a clearer, better diagram for this and posting this on Jerry's Live. So to the person that asked that question, if you don't want a really funky shaped coffee mug, I will be posting it there for you to find out. But hopefully this will give you kind of the building blocks you need to be able to draw a cleaner, nicer version for yourself. So, you know what? I think I can squeeze in a boat really, really quickly. We're gonna do it really fast. I might not even explain every step fully, but we're gonna do it. It's gonna, yes, it'll be a speedboat. It's gonna be a fast boat. It's gonna be the fastest boat you've ever seen. You're gonna be able to tell it's fast just by looking at it. So, you know what, maybe I'll go back to this pencil here. I'll even like ignore what I did over here. Ignore this for now. I'm drawing up here. I'm not even gonna draw out my vanishing points of my horizon line. I'm just gonna start drawing out a box in perspective. And I'm just gonna try and eye it, so. It's kind of coming this way. Boats are long and skinny, unlike coffee mugs, so it's okay if I do a long and skinny box for this one. We already got our box in perspective. I'm going to draw the back plane, the invisible side of this box coming down. And from there, I'm just going to try and think about what's larger, what's smaller. I'm going to intersect this in the middle so I can kind of get like a center plane going, so I can understand exactly where the center of my boat is going to be. And then boats are kind of like U-shaped. We're going to draw like a very simple wooden boat. You know, if we stared at the very front of a boat, this might be what it looked like. They're very U-shaped. They're very like elongated. We're drawing like a pretty simple boat here. Maybe I'll even, I don't know, add a little flag or something. Yes, boat. But you can see here, I'm going to take the bottom of this. Maybe I'll even add, I don't know what it's called, but boats will have like a little like straight line on the bottom, a little wooden plank bottom. I don't know what it's called or what it's for, but I'm going to take that and I'm going to try and draw the side curve of this boat coming up like this. And I don't really want the top of this boat to come to the top of this plane, so I'm going to make this a little bit shorter because I think our boat is going to be really skinny if I do that. So I'm going to make it a little bit shorter so it's not quite as tall and skinny of a boat. And then I'm going to try and do the same. It's essentially just like drawing out where I think those points would be in perspective, keeping in mind that like this plane right here is going to be slightly smaller than this one over here, and finding where those points, where the corners of my boat would be, and then just connecting them together the best way that I can imagine. So I have those points again back here, and then again just trying to find that curve of the back of this boat and the bottom there, and then that little wood thing that sticks out of the bottom. Again, I told you guys that this was gonna be an interesting looking boat. I realized that I need to get, boats aren't flat on each side. They don't look like this, which is what I'm drawing right now, you know? So I need to make sure that this side comes out a little bit. This is the other thing about drawing from imagination, is that you'd be shocked how many things you don't know what they look like until you're drawing them. I had a professor in college one time who, we were doing perspective drawing and we were learning to draw from imagination and things like that. And she asked us all to just draw a tomato, like the inside of a tomato, from memory. I have no idea what that looks like. I have no idea. There's seeds and mush. I think she spent like the next hour showing me photos from this weird, I don't even know what it was, this event in another country where they roll around in tomatoes. I was like, okay, I think I know what the inside of a tomato looks like. You don't need to show me these photos anymore. But it was a good time for me, at least. Okay, all I did right here is I continued the center line plane out beyond my box so that I can kind of bring this boat out to a point and get a bit of that curve going. And again, if you would like to see a clearer diagram of how to draw a boat, I can do that too, pretty easily for you guys in our Jerry's Live Facebook group if you would like to join. So I'm gonna get kind of the curves of this boat going, the bottom of it. Maybe I'll draw out some of these wooden planks real quick. Maybe I'll even sketch in, like this is your little seats on the boat where you're gonna go in. I'll do a little bit of shading so you guys can see clearer what I have drawn here since we're doing so fast. But you can see, here's your boat. It's like a little canoe. Clean and simple. Okay, that's all we have time for tonight. This was a lot of information jam-packed at once, so again, I will be going back through the comments and answering all your stuff, and if you want to learn more about perspective, you guys already said that you did, so we'll try and plan something out. I can teach you guys 3-point perspective, which is like you're looking at a tall building and the tall building's vanishing into the sky, but also vanishing in other 2 different directions. 4-point, 5-point, and 6-point is getting to drawing things within a sphere, which is really fun and cool. And I can even show you guys how to draw shadows in perspective. If you want to draw any kind of funky shape with like a weird shadow coming out of it, I can do that too. It's all really fun and exciting to be able to draw things from your imagination without a reference. And I'm excited to teach about it. So thank you guys so much for coming tonight. Again, if you want to check out any of the products that I used, go to the JerrysArtarama website and type in JL13 into into the search bar. JL313 is the class code, and you will find the teacher's cart where all these products are. Thank you so much for coming. Next week is going to be our holiday gift guide show. So if you need a gift for any artist in your life, you want to find it, Emmy and I are going to be showing you guys a ton of the products that we have here at Jerry's, and we've got several different kits set up for different artists in your life. Like if you're a watercolor artist, if you're acrylic or an oil artist, and you need to find something for yourself or for others, check out that show. We'll be showing you tons of cool stuff. It's going to be on Facebook and YouTube, so we're going to be here on YouTube for you guys. And yeah, thank you all so much for coming tonight, and bye!